Now, reports out of Israel say officials there who've been advocating for Trump to continue the war against Iran were surprised by the submission of that U.S. ceasefire plan. We're going to talk more about Israel's involvement in the war now with Middle East expert Dr. H.A. Hellyer, who joins me live from Cairo. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us, Dr. Hellyer. Are the U.S. and Israel coming to a diverging point on this war in Iran?
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to be on Fence and Qatr. So here's the issue, right? I think that when it came to the beginning of this war, Washington and the Israelis were more or less on the same page, but that represented a certain firmness and certainty on the Israeli side, i.e., they had their goals, they made them clear, and they've stuck to them. Whereas on the American side, these have changed, and they seem to be, very confusing to people in Washington itself. You had different talking points being given by the president, by the Minister of by the Defense Secretary, and so on. Even the idea of regime change. Now, the American president says that regime change has already been accomplished in Iran. Because obviously the top officials are all gone, they were assassinated, and there's a new crop in charge. That's not regime change, right? And certainly not the regime change that the Israelis were looking for. But let's be also clear about something else. These are not two equal partners. The United States is the superpower, and the Israelis cannot move without the United States giving it a clear indication that it won't stop them. So it has tremendous leverage. The question is whether or not it chooses to use it.
Right. So Israel obviously wants this war to continue. Today, again, it's targeting government infrastructure in Iran. Is it at all capable of continuing this war on its own without the U.S. or not at all?
There's capacity, but there's also politics. Could they continue in terms of capacity? Yes, they could. Would they do so if the United States made it clear, no, you must stop? No, they wouldn't. So this is why whenever we see these news reports about there being, quote unquote, fights between Tel Aviv and Washington, serious analysts really laugh. Because the truth is that if the United States really wanted to put its foot down, it doesn't need to do too much. It has tremendous leverage over the Israelis. It had tremendous leverage over the Israelis when it came to the genocidal war in Gaza. It has tremendous leverage over the Israelis when it comes to this war. There's no question about that, which is why last year, when the Trump administration decided that the war on Iran was over, they told the Israelis, it's over, cut it out, stand down. And they did.
And you really think that that could happen again this time? The U.S. could say to Israel, stand down, and it would at this point?
If your question is, would the Israelis stand down if the Americans told them to, then yes, of course, there's no question in my mind. The question that I have is whether or not the Americans would tell them to. That's the issue. It's not about whether or not Israel is not going to turn around and tell the United States, especially the Trump administration, no, we're going to do this, and if you don't like it, you can lump it.
Israel, meanwhile, fighting this war on two fronts. It's also continuing its strikes on Hezbollah strongholds in Lebanon. Is it capable of eliminating Hezbollah as it wants to? And if not, what is it trying to do in Lebanon?
So a couple of things here. When it comes to Lebanon, it's not simply striking, quote unquote, Hezbollah strongholds. It has invaded and occupied a large swathe of Lebanese territory, at least 10%, or once 10%, as in the new line of control is supposed to now be the Litani River, and I suspect that they will go much further than that. Is it capable of wiping out Hezbollah? No, it isn't. By the way, Hezbollah being a very odious character and actor not only in Lebanon, but in the region more generally. But you can't wipe it out, certainly not like this. The next point is that also you've seen very significant Israeli political figures, including within the cabinet of the current prime minister, indicating that they want this occupation of Lebanese territory to become permanent. And you've seen very senior Israeli political figures talk about how the south of Lebanon, part of the south of Lebanon at least, ought to be annexed. And you've seen this regularly from Israeli political figures, not just in recent weeks or months or even years, but you go much further than that. You see how the issue of Gaza, the West Bank, these are territories for many that ought to be annexed to Israel, the Golan Heights, which is, of course, part of Syria, and now talk about Lebanon as well. So I think people ought to be very cautious about making this simply about Hezbollah. Hezbollah ought to subject itself to the authority of the Lebanese government. There ought to be no discussion or debate about that, but this is certainly not the way to try to peel away support from Hezbollah within Lebanon itself. On the contrary, if the Israelis move in further in this regard, I think most Lebanese are very concerned about what would happen to the very existence of Lebanon as a nation state.
Dr. Hellyer, thank you so much for that, speaking to me live from Cairo.